Rain lashed against the windows of my cramped office, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. A frantic call an hour ago, Mrs. Higgins, my landlady, found sprawled on her Persian rug, a half-eaten scone clutched in her hand, a cryptic note tucked beneath her teacup. The clock strikes thrice before the raven flies, it read, penned in surprisingly elegant calligraphy. Mrs. Higgins, bless her soul, was more likely to quote supermarket flyers than Edgar Allan Poe. I'm Detective Inspector Leo Maxwell, and cryptic notes are my bread and butter, though usually less scone related. This, however, felt different. Mrs. Higgins, despite her eccentric collection of porcelain cats and her habit of borrowing my newspaper before I'd finished it, was a kind soul. Someone had done this, and the clock was ticking, literally. I glanced at my watch. 11:57 p.m. The note mentioned a clock striking thrice. Midnight. Could that be the deadline? I grabbed my coat, the damp wool clinging to me like a second skin. This was going to be a long night. Mrs. Higgins' flat was a whirlwind of floral wallpaper and the faint scent of lavender. Constable Davies, bless his enthusiasm, was already there, looking paler than the wallpaper itself. No sign of forced entry, sir, he stammered, pointing to the untouched lock. And the scone.it looks normal, except for a tiny, almost imperceptible puncture mark on the underside. Poison? I carefully bagged the scone, my mind racing. The note, the scone, the time.it all felt like a carefully constructed puzzle. I examined the note again. The clock strikes thrice before the raven flies. Raven, Poe, could it be a literary reference? I racked my brain. Mrs. Higgins, as far as I knew, wasn't a bookworm. Her library consisted mainly of gardening manuals and celebrity biographies. The clock in the hallway chimed midnight. 3 resonant bongs echoed through the flat. Silence. Then, a sudden flutter at the window. A large, black raven landed on the sill, its intelligent eyes staring directly at me. My heart pounded. This was too much. A raven, at midnight, after a cryptic note mentioning a raven. It felt staged, theatrical. But who would stage such a thing? And why? I cautiously approached the raven. It didn't flinch. As I got closer, I noticed something glinting beneath its wing. Another note. This one, smaller, folded into a tight square. I unfolded it carefully. It was a single word, written in the same elegant calligraphy as the first note, learn, learn. What was I supposed to learn? I looked around the room, my eyes scanning every detail. The porcelain cats, the floral wallpaper, the gardening manuals. Then, it hit me. The gardening manuals. Mrs. Higgins had recently started taking an English language course. She'd mentioned wanting to read gardening books in their original English, learn English. Could the notes be some kind of language learning exercise? A twisted, macabre lesson? I felt a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't a murder mystery. It was a language puzzle.
I grabbed one of the gardening manuals. It was a level 3 English learning book, the same level Mrs. Higgins was studying. I flipped through the pages, my eyes searching for clues. Then, I saw it. A passage highlighted in the same elegant calligraphy as the notes. It was an excerpt from a short story. The title, The Raven's Riddle. The story was about a woman who received cryptic messages, which, when translated into simple English, revealed the location of a hidden treasure. I scanned the passage, my mind working furiously. The highlighted words formed a simple sentence: the scone holds the key, the scone. I rushed back to the kitchen, carefully retrieved the bagged scone, and examined it again. This time, I noticed something I'd missed before. A tiny, almost invisible seam on the underside. I carefully pried the scone open. Inside, Nestled amongst the crumbs was a small, antique key. My heart pounded. This wasn't a murder mystery, but a treasure hunt disguised as one. But who would create such an elaborate, and frankly disturbing, game? I followed the instructions in the story, which led me to a hidden compartment behind one of the porcelain cats. Inside, I found a small, velvet box. I opened it. Inside, there was no treasure. Just another note. This one, however, was written in Mrs. Higgins' handwriting. Leo, I know you're a good detective, and I wanted to give you a challenge. I've been learning English, and I wanted to practice my writing. I hope you enjoyed my little game. P.S. The scone was blueberry, by the way. I stared at the note, a mixture of relief and disbelief washing over me. It wasn't a murder. It was a prank. A very elaborate, and slightly terrifying, prank. Mrs. Higgins, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. I chuckled, a nervous laugh that echoed through the quiet flat. I had spent the entire night chasing shadows, deciphering cryptic messages, and fearing the worst, only to discover that it was all a language learning exercise. A very effective one, I had to admit. I had certainly learned a few new English words myself. And I'd certainly never look at a scone the same way again.